Hi friends, host Eric here with more on OPS and jumpers, and hopefully in a way that people can hear what I'm saying and learn something, okay? Because, I was telling myself 5 seconds ago, Eric, do not be a condescending dick in this video. But it's like when I make a video about jumpers, it attracts the dumbest comments that are exemplary of the worst examples of thinking, or failing to think, I guess is more correct. All right, so for example, somebody put up a comment. I'm not even going to name a lot of names here or show the comments. There's no point. It's like they're so. If somebody has a strong third function, then they're a jumper. That's what you don't seem to get, Eric. Okay, this is one of the sort of comments I get. If it's a skill, it can be developed. Was the comment I got. Look, they put together a lot of data showing that some ISFJs have especially strong TI. That makes them jumpers. Look, it doesn't need to mean a mechanical difference. We're simply describing a demographic reality, you know? Some birds are bigger than others. That's okay. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to distinguish between birds on size. So to respond to this sort of nonsense, and that genuinely is what it is, absolute nonsense. Let's first look at this issue of strength. The problem here is this notion. If somebody has a strong third function, what's implicit in this notion is that you don't have to have any trade-off. So, for example, let's say I have a strong third function. So, okay, well, what am I trading off instead? If I'm trading off my second function to have a strong third function, so that must be making my second function weaker. Except cognitive functions don't operate like that. So, my second slot function is my operational value. It's my predominant instrumental approach towards life. And it's how I address and consider problems. If I'm fortunate, like I am, I'm using my tool function exactly where it deserves to be used to explain things that are intellectually binary, that either are correct or incorrect. But if I'm using, say, the wrong tool function in order to evaluate these things, then I'm going to both be wrong and I'm going to harm other people's capacity to understand things well. So the thing is, you might say I've got a weak third slot function, or you might say I have a strong third slot function, depending on your perspective, okay? If you're Dave Superpowers and Shannon, you'd say your observations as third parties of my third slot function are more reliable than my own because you're not me and therefore not biased by being me. And that's how you be objective about something. Well, that's from the perspective of people who aren't naturally objective, right? So it's if in fact you were used to being driven a lot by your feelings and making determinations about what's correct, then you need that kind of distancing. If you are accustomed to always excluding from the equation your own interests and making a disinterested calculus as a matter of operational course, as I am, then you actually don't really have that much concern about bias. But that's irrelevant. The point is, if I were to replace if you were to say I've got strong FE because I'm doing a lot of FE stuff, like right now I'm doing perception management, if only the perception management of convincing you that I'm right and you're wrong if you disagree with me about this, if only that, you know, it's still perception management of some sort. But you'll notice it's not at the expense of introverted thinking, nor is it at the expense of extroverted intuition. Because, in fact, the idea that you can have stronger or weaker functions is fundamentally misleading and wrong, in that it fails to account for the fact that they behave specific ways based not only on their kind of value, namely instrumentality or absoluteness, which is to say a means or an end, but also in terms of understanding that like say, your third thought function is not a separate thing in reality. It's an implied relationship that you as a human being have between intuition and sensing, and between thinking and feeling. All those permutations of 8 functions we talk about, those are all implied necessarily, definitionally, by your first 2 functions. In other words, what it means to have FE third is exactly the same thing as what it means to be an ENTP, assuming you're an EDOM. But the point is, like, to be NETI is to be an ENTP. To be an ENTP, therefore, is to have a defined relationship between feeling functionalities, feeling interfaces, and deliberative decision-making modalities. And to have a specific kind of relationship between those things. Now, when you say your third thought function is very strong, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because you might be able to say, in your, well, let me go open this up a little bit more here. So what we need to first do is, to be correct, we need to distinguish between affect and attention. So the part of attention that you can see, measure directly, test, assess, without asking me to self-report, is affect. And affect is a component of attentional manners, but how much of a component depends somewhat on whether it's an extroverted or introverted function, and somewhat on where it is in your stack, so-called, An attentional manner, therefore, needs to incorporate not just affect considerations, which are subject applications of self, but also what are, you might, if you were to borrow a term from linguistics, called the illocutionary plane, that is to say, the part that's not explicit to others. So every human being behaves as a subject or an agent or an object. That is to say, the relationship with information can go like this. I can put information out there. I can receive information unbidden, or I can seek specific information and go get it. This is true of information, and it's true of stuff as well. Okay? These possible angles of relationship between externalities and internalities, they constrain our capacity to be entirely individuals, because there's a finite number of ways in which one can pay attention, and to prioritize some of those ways of paying attention, which necessarily means prioritizing being, say, a subject over an agent or an object. I'm prioritizing being a subject because I'm an action type. That definitionally, it necessitates my relationship with these other things that we call cognitive functions. Really what it means is I am ontologically, identity-wise, constructed such that you're probably going to find me abrasive, condescending, or whatever, because I'm prioritizing a certain aspect of your perceptions and a certain aspect of my own subjectivity, right? It's not that I don't have subjectivity. It's that it's not playing a conscious, active, willful role in my actual process of being through time. And that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be possible to elicit it, to test it directly, or to link something to that concept, that cognitive function that matches up with some aspect of affect that can be triggered by a stimulation of some sort, namely asking them a question or whatever, okay? So the problem then with these jumpers people is one of several possibilities. You could talk about it as being no frame, wrong frame, or mixed frame. No frame is just saying, well, we're just playing with words, we're not doing anything. Wrong frame would be, oh, well, cognitive functions and personality don't describe actual mechanics. It's just a descriptive taxonomy, not a model. It doesn't model any dynamic processes. That would just be wrong. And if you choose to think of it like that, then you are pretending as though cars only exist on showroom floors and parked in museums and don't ever actually drive, right? It's silly. But what most commonly is happening here is a mixed frame, a willingness by these comet levers to jump back and forth willy-nilly as they feel like it. So that is to say, when they want it to be mechanical and function like a model, they talk about it as though it does. When they want it to be, when they don't want to have to defend anything that's illogical, they just say, oh, it's taxonomical now. And then when they go back talking about how useful and meaningful this thing is, they treat it as though it were a model. And then when you challenge them on the legitimacy of the model, they go back to, oh, it's just a taxonomy. So that's ultimately what's going on here in terms of a lot of the pushback I get on this. So I want to specifically address the comment of Cyborg Touchdown, who's a special kind of tard. His point was this: if it's a skill, then you can develop it. There are different kinds of skills, right? When we use the word skill, we mean a couple of different distinct things. That doesn't mean we don't mean anything, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a meaning. It means that we might mean one thing or the other depending on how we're using it, right? So the point is, when you're talking about a skill that you learn in life, such as playing guitar, it's a skill that you must acquire through practice. If you're talking about a skill like having a good memory, it's something that you're naturally born with, what you might call a talent, okay? Now, if we're talking about a skill like knowing what you want, people don't even think about it as a skill. One of the big elements to consider when we're talking about the word skill is when I'm using it to test people, I'm saying, to what extent can we strongly link any kind of triggered response from people by questions, stimulated response, to capacity to use or habitual use of a given attentional manner. Now, granted, some of those things correlate well enough with testable skills of affect, such as TI does, SI, NE, that in fact, when I talk about it, I might talk about it in terms of strength as well, or your TI is not good enough. Now, what I'm really saying is a more complicated sentence. It's, I've developed assessments for that will test, that will allow me to convert testable abilities on your side into correct information about your relationship to a certain kind of attention. It's not because introverted thinking is exactly the same thing as conditional reasoning questions or something. It's not. It's a habit of attention that focuses on a disinterested evaluation of consistency of symbolic representations primarily. Although there is a less word-based or language-based manifestation, there are less language-based manifestations of it as well. But the thing is, because it's an attentional manner, it's a way of being through time that prioritizes that, what I just said, that a disinterested third-party-esque evaluation of statuses based on consistency. It turns out that because it's one of those objective functions, that is to say, it's much more low resolution, when things can be turned into zeros and ones, that data for people processing it is much less high resolution. So you can process it a lot more effectively and a lot more purposefully. So it's like because I'm constantly making the disinterested calculus, I can only consider factors that objectively resonate or universally resonate with everybody, which means I have to cite examples of contradictions. I have to negate with justifications that withstand scrutiny as justifications in and of themselves and are consistent with my other justifications and all that kind of stuff that I got to do, right? So the thing is it necessarily the case then that I'm going to be really good at something, at testing something that's necessarily definitionally constrained to things that are testable? And is that test going to link well to that function? Yes, obviously, yes. But that doesn't mean that all things that are skills, that is, say, testable, can be developed. As a matter of fact, having a good memory can't be developed. You might improve your existing ability to score well on assessments of it, but functionally, no, it can't. So ENFJs, ENTJs will never, even if they work really hard at it, remember a bunch of sequential details that they fundamentally, by nature, consider completely frivolous waste of time. Even if they did force themselves to practice it, they never would. And yet, it's a skill we can test. So, Cyborg Touchdown, I didn't even let your comment publish. It was in the... YouTube tries so hard to protect my feelings, it's ridiculous. Like, to see potentially offensive comments, I gotta click yes, I acknowledge I might see some bad words a couple times. It's ridiculous. But anyway, his comment was so idiotic I didn't even post it. And he said, you and my ENTP theology teacher are so crazy and wrong and stupid. Well, what he means is I'm trying to play the wrong sport on the right field. So, in other words, his sport is turd licking, and my sport is basketball. And it is true that there's nothing inherently better about basketball than turd licking. Although most of us maybe think turd licking is a stupid sport, it's not inherently worse, right? But it is not okay for him to put all this poo in the basketball court, because we're trying to play basketball here, and my cognitive function stack is correctly located. In other words, doing this kind of reasoning, logic, understanding of things is correctly applied in the area of cognitive functions, specifically to correctly model attention as a means of understanding how human personality manifests into predictable, defined relationships between intuition and sensing and thinking and feeling that manifest as 16 distinct personality types. 16. Not 16 with jumpers, not 16 with subtypes, not 32, not 512, 6 motherfucking teen. A cognitive function's definitional constraints make it such. To say you are in ETI is to have already defined your relationship with all of the functions in full. The fact that a certain affect component that converts reasonably well to a testable or assessable skill might be shinier or less shinier on one person, to highlight that distinction and shininess for any reason is to mislead everybody about everything about personality, because it ignores fundamentally what a cognitive function is and the definitional constraints implicit in being that. Okay, so that's it for this video, and thank you for watching. And people who defend jumpers, please watch this whole video. I know I said at the end is stupid. It makes no sense, right? It's already too late for me to tell you this. If you're going to comment some bullshit, watch it again before you even start commenting. Watch this video 3, 4, 5 times. As many times it takes you to understand it. And bring all the OPS people over to watch it. OPS, Dave Superpowers, Shannon, they are completely full of shit and misleading everybody with a relentless campaign of horrible misinformation. There's no other correct interpretation of it. The end.